CST.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear evidence from Mr. Simon O'Connor, who for a time was Ryden's project manager for the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower. Following an application made to me last year, I directed that Mr. O'Connor should not be visible while he gives his evidence, although his voice will be heard in the usual way. When he replies to questions, therefore, those watching on the live stream will see only the plain blue background with the inquiry logo. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I now call Mr. Simon O'Connor, please.
I do solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. O'Connor. Sit down and make yourself comfortable. All right?
Yep.
Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. O'Connor, good morning. Can I start by saying thank you to you for attending today to give evidence to the inquiry? We very much appreciate it. If you have any difficulty understanding any of my questions, then I will rephrase them if you ask me to do that, or ask the question in a different way. If you feel you need a break at any point, please just tell us and we can take a short break. Can I also just ask you, please, to keep your voice up for the transcriber who sits to your right, so that she can get down into the transcript what you're saying very clearly.
Okay.
And also just one other tip on that score, a nod of the head or a shake of the head doesn't go onto the transcript. So you have to say yes or no, if that's your answer.
Okay.
Now, you've made one witness statement dated the 28th of September 2018. It's on the desk in front of you to your left there, but it'll appear on the screen as well. It's at RYD 3094221. Is that your witness statement?
It is.
Can I ask you to turn to page 12, please? Is that your signature?
It is.
Have you read this witness statement recently?
Yes.
Are its contents true?
Yes.
And have you discussed your evidence that you are going to give today with anybody else before coming here to give evidence?
No.
Haven't. Thank you. Now, I'm going to start with a few questions relating to your experience and your background before moving to ask you about some detailed questions in relation to your involvement in the Grenfell Tower project. All right? So far as your background is concerned, starting with that, we can see from your statement that you worked for Ryden between September 2002 and September 2015.
I did.
And during that time, I think you worked your way up from foreman to site manager and then took on some project management roles. Is that right?
Yes.
And I think one example you give is the Chalcots Estate project in Camden in North London.
Yep.
Yes. And you also had been employed as a site manager on the St George's Estate project with Ryden, immediately before moving on to the Grenfell Tower project.
I was, yes.
Yes. Was the St George's Estate project an external refurbishment?
It was, but not with any cladding.
But not with any cladding. But it included, I think, 3 high-rise blocks.
It did.
And you were involved at the Chalcots, as you said. Were you site manager at the Chalcots Estate?
One of many, yes.
One of many. How many?
I think there must have been 7, maybe 8.
Right. Now, the Chalcots Estate was also a high-rise project, wasn't it?
It was.
And that did include the fitting of, or involve the fitting of, overcladding to the exterior of those blocks.
It did.
Specifically, I think it did involve fitting ACM cladding, yes?
I believe so now. I wouldn't have been aware then. It was nothing to do with the cladding.
I see. You weren't aware then. Right. From your start on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment project in May 2014, were you occupied exclusively on that project until August 2015?
I believe so.
Right. Can I ask you to look at your statement, RYD 30942221, as we have in front of us, and turn to page 7 I'd like to look at paragraph 14 with you, please. You say there were design team meetings throughout my time working on the project. I would be present for most of these meetings, but not all of them, so that I was aware of any discussions taking place from a logistics, programming and progress perspective, and so that as project manager I could make sure things were happening at the right time on site. There were deadlines for the different stages of the project, and I needed to know if a design decision was going to affect a deadline. Drawings would go through various revisions. I was aware of this from the design team meetings. Once the drawings were marked approved for construction, arrangements would be made for that work to go ahead. It is at this stage that I would get involved because I needed to coordinate the works now that the drawings had been approved. So can we take it from that, Mr. O'Connor, that you were aware of all design decisions?
Not all design decisions, no. Like I said, I didn't go to all the meetings. I was purely there from a logistics and sequencing point of view.
Right, but you didn't make any design decisions yourself, did
Absolutely
you?
not.
No. And you say, and it's a passage I read to you, it's at this stage that I would get involved. That's once the drawings were marked approved for construction.
Yes.
And then if you look at the start of paragraph 15, you say, I had seen the drawings for the exterior modifications, but I would not have considered any other information about the components being used, for example, from the manufacturers. I was focused on when the materials or components would be arriving on site. From a logistics and programming perspective, I was not involved in the design or selection of materials for the works to the exterior of the building, including the rain screen, cladding panels and insulation. Now, in the light of what you say there, Mr. O'Connor, is it fair to say that you considered your active role only really started after the design had been approved for construction?
Yes, I mean, when I joined the project, from memory, I believe the materials had already been chosen. There was only some confusion regarding face fixing or cassette and some colours.
Yes. And just examining a little bit further your involvement in what you did with the designs, is it right that what you did in practice, in general terms, was to take the finalised drawings, which you got stamped approved for construction, as the basis for you to coordinate the work so that the project ran on time and to budget?
On time, yes.
Right. But you not to budget?
I wasn't in control of the budget.
Right. Did you have any role or input in relation to setting the budget or sticking to the budget?
No, not really. That was the surveyor's team job.
I see. Now, the finalised designs took the form, I think you're telling us, of approved for construction drawings which had approved for construction stamped on them. Is that right?
That's what I recall, yes.
Is it right then that you wouldn't see any drawings which didn't have that stamp on them?
No, I would see drawings move backwards and forwards during copied into emails.
Right.
But I wouldn't be commenting on them. I would just know that if a drawing had gone off from Studio E to, say, Harley's, it might come back with a comment on it.
Right.
That was I wouldn't particularly look at them in depth until I was actually given them to construct.
Can you help us with this? Did you see any drawings, to the best of your recollection, which came from Harley's marked approved for construction before they had been seen by Studio E?
I don't recall. At the time, I don't recall.
Okay. When you received drawings marked approved for construction, did you take any steps yourself to check whether the designs complied with Ryden's contractual requirements?
I wasn't qualified to do so.
Were you aware, even in general terms, of Ryden's contractual requirements and obligations?
Not really, no.
Not really. Did Mr.
No, sorry, no.
That's very fair to take out the qualification. Did Mr. Lawrence ever give you any kind of instruction or briefing as to, even in outline, what the contents of Ryden's obligations to the TMO were?
What contractual obligations?
Contractual obligations. No. Did he ever give you any briefing or outline instruction as to what any subcontractors' obligations were to Ryden?
Not that I recall, no.
No. does it follow that you didn't take any steps yourself to check whether the designs complied with the building regulations?
Yes.
Yes, you did, or yes, you
No,
didn't?
I didn't, no.
You didn't?
So I was
Right.
saying yes to you. Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you saw drawings approved for construction, so far as you understood it, Mr. O'Connor, who had approved those drawings?
The architects, the specialists who we employed. No, there was a number of designers and specialists, i.e. architects, that have been trained to do this kind of thing.
When you received information about which materials were being ordered to site or delivered to site, where did that information tend generally to come from?
Sorry, can you ask the question again?
Yes, let me try it a different way. When materials were ordered to come to site, were you responsible primarily for ordering them onto site as the project manager?
It would have been a supply and package, so the subcontractors would order their own materials and they would book them in through the gate men at the front.
As the occupant of the role of project manager throughout this period, did you have any role in the selection of materials to go into the refurbishment?
No.
No. Can I ask you to look at a document, please? SEA 50189. This is an email from Simon Lawrence to John Hoban of RBKC, Building Control, dated the 3rd of September 2014. And I'd like you to look at the sentence starting at the end of the first line. You can see that you're copied into this email, as is Neil Crawford and Bruce Soanes, both from Studio E. And in the second sentence, at the beginning at the end of the first line, Mr. Lawrence says to Mr. Hoban, "I understand that you dropped into our site office recently and had a brief introduction to the project and drawings from our project manager, Simon O'Connor. Do you remember having a discussion with Mr. Hoban at about this time?"
I don't, but if there's a good chance he would have come in just to introduce himself so I could put a face to a name.
Right. Mr. Lawrence says that you had a brief introduction, or he had a brief introduction to the project and drawings from our project manager, Simon O'Connor. Do you remember introducing Mr. Hoban to the drawings?
I don't.
You don't. So you can't help me about which drawings you showed him?
I can't.
Do you remember asking Mr. Hoban or having any kind of discussion with him at this time, whether at this meeting or around this time, whether the details of those drawings were compliant with the building regulations?
No, I wouldn't have had that conversation.
You say you wouldn't have had that conversation. No. Does that tell us that you weren't in a position to have that conversation, or that you don't recall having it?
I don't think I'd have been in a position to have that conversation with a building control officer.
Right. Did you, in general terms, ever have any conversations with John Hoban or anybody else from RBKC?
Regarding?
Well, in terms, well, in relation to anything in relation to this project, do you remember any conversations with John Hoban of RBKC?
Not particularly, no, not the ones that stand out.
Okay. Well, we'll come back, I think, and look at that, perhaps in a little bit more detail later on. Can I go back to your witness statement, RYD 3094221? And I'd like to go to page 8, please, at the top of the page. And let's look together at paragraph 15. You say there, "I know now, although I did not know at the time of my involvement in the project, that the types of materials used in the modifications to the exterior of the building were very commonly used. I do not know why certain materials may have been chosen. My role as project manager did not involve deciding if materials were fit for purpose." Now, you know now, I think, that the materials used in the exterior modifications at Grenfell were very commonly used, is what you say.
Yes.
Does that include specifically the insulation?
I think all of the materials were fairly commonplace.
All of them, so insulation and the rain screen cladding?
Yes.
But you didn't know that at the time?
No. This was my first cladding project.
Now, you told us earlier that you'd worked on Chalkerts. Had you worked on Ferrier Point?
No.
No. So, but you worked at Chalkerts. Is it right that even by 2014-15 and your involvement on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment project, you did not know at that time whether the materials used at Grenfell were commonly used?
I didn't know.
Did you ever think about it at the time?
Not really. That wasn't my role. I mean, there was a number of people around me, the designers and architects, and that specify this stuff day in, day out. I'm not qualified to do that.
Yes. So can we take it from that you never asked any questions or familiarised yourself with the detailed properties of, for example, aluminium composite rain screen cladding?
No.
Right. So is this right that at no stage of your career, actually, before the Grenfell Tower fire, did you think, oh, I wonder what this material is?
Honestly, no.
Right. And it would therefore follow, I suppose, is this right, that you never thought to yourself, I wonder if this is safe?
I saw conversations regarding, building regs and stuff like that from between Studio Inn and Harley's and different parties. I just presumed they had all covered that base, bearing in mind they're the specialists.
Yes. Now, can I ask you to turn to RYD 3094208? And what I'm going to do, Mr. O'Connor, is to show you part of a witness statement of Alan Grint. Before I do, can you confirm that Alan Grint was a site manager employed by Ryden on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment project?
Yes.
He was. Can we look at page 2, please? At paragraph 8. And you can see there at the top of the page, he says, as a site manager, my main role was to ensure that the work was carried out by the subcontractors in accordance with the programme of works. My instructions came from Simon O'Connor. Now, pausing there and looking at the bottom of the page, at paragraph 16, I just want to focus with you on the last sentence there. Mm-hmm. He says, if building control were on site during my time on the project, I think Simon O'Connor would have dealt with them. First, do you agree that your role included the management and instruction of the site managers on site employed by Ryden on this project?
Yes.
But is it fair to say that an important part of that role was the provision of design information to these site managers so that they could coordinate the works taking place on site?
Yes.
And also, is it right that that role would include ensuring the quality of workmanship?
Not just solely me, no. I mean, I wouldn't be out looking at everything myself because it was a big project and there was a number of managers. That responsibility would be passed on to the likes of Alan, but they would be given the correct paperwork to be able to do that.
You say there were a number of managers. Were there a number of project managers in the same position as you on this project? Right. So when you say there were a number of managers, what are you referring to?
Site managers.
Oh, I see. Site managers. Okay. But just to press you a little bit on the question, is it not right that your role was to ensure the quality of workmanship, even if there were site managers themselves who were watching the workers?
Not entirely my role, no. I mean, I would oversee the site managers.
Yes.
So I suppose in reality it would fall to my remit, but I can't be everywhere always. No. So I am reliant on their professional opinions as well.
Indeed, but did you see your job as monitoring and supervising them so far as the quality of workmanship is concerned?
Yeah.
Yes. And the ultimate purpose of you supervising that exercise was to ensure that the project ran on time?
Yes.
And in accordance with the approved designs?
Yes, in accordance with approved drawings, yeah.
Yes. So did you have conversations or give instructions to your site managers on site when you looked at the drawings together, pointed parts out and gave them instructions as to how to go about constructing what the drawings said should be constructed?
We had specialist subcontractors to do that. I would give the drawings to the managers and ask if they had any comments on it. And then we would generally beforehand probably sit down with the subcontractor as well.
Yes. Is Mr. Grint correct in paragraph 16 when he says that if building control were on site, Simon O'Connor would have dealt with them.
I would have welcomed them onto site and probably done the making of tea and, you know, just chewing the fat for a minute, and then he would have gone out with the relevant managers, i.e. he used to go on the mast climbers with other managers to look at various things. I wouldn't have gone always.
I see. When you say other managers, you mean other site managers?
Yeah, sorry.
The,
Yeah.
the site managers you were responsible for supervising?
Yes.
Yes. You say I wouldn't have gone always. Did you ever go?
I would go out on occasion, yeah.
Right. And when you did go on those occasions, did you have detailed conversations with the building control officer?
Not detailed. We was just walking around looking at the progress. I would generally go internally if I was going to go. I wouldn't go up on a mast climber because it just takes too much time out of my day to do that. That's why the managers are there.
I see. Okay. On those occasions, do you remember ever having any discussion or conversation with Mr. Hoban about whether or not what he was looking at complied with the building regulations?
No.
Can I then go to a document, ART 402087? This is the tender documentation submitted by Ryden for the Grenfell Tower project, dated 13th of February 2014. First of all, do you remember ever seeing this document at the time?
No, I think this is the first time I've seen it.
Right. Well, let's take it quickly then. Let's go to page 36, which is a version of your CV.
Yep.
It sits within the tender documentation. Did you compile this CV?
No.
Did you have any input into its compilation?
This would have been someone like the bid writers or marketing team, not
I see.
me.
Okay. If you look at the top right-hand side, the role within the team, it says, Simon is responsible for managing the smooth delivery of the project. He is responsible for all operations on site, including delivery to programme and budget, coordinating design, and management of subcontractors. You see that?
Yep.
Do you agree with that summary of your role?
No, I don't.
Which parts do you not agree with?
Coordinating design.
Right. So how is that wrong?
Because I wouldn't be qualified to coordinate designers, and I wouldn't know where to start.
Did nobody from Ryden ask you to approve this CV before it was put in the tender documentation?
I never saw the tender documentation.
Right.
These CVs were built up of sort of, you know, back jobs you'd done in the past.
Right. Well, let's look and see what else it says. It says Simon produces the works program. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is responsible for compiling the health and safety plans for client approval. Is that correct?
Health and safety file, yeah.
Right.
Construction phase health and safety plan, yes.
Okay. And managing health and safety on site.
Yes.
Yes. And then it sets out the qualifications you have there. I'm going to assume they're correct, unless you tell me otherwise.
I didn't complete the HNC.
Right. Okay. And then benefits to the project. Simon is passionate about the site team working well together to ensure site management is to the highest standard. I'm certainly going to assume, Mr. O'Connor, that that's correct.
Absolutely.
He confidently leads the on-site team in terms of design, technical requirements, health and safety, subcontractor management, and customer care. Is that correct?
I would not agree with the design part, no.
Right. He is able to positively contribute technical expertise and facilitate informed choice for clients and residents during value engineering and decision-making processes. Is that correct?
I don't think I've ever been part of a value engineering process. I've definitely been part of the residents' choices and stuff like that, but I don't think I've ever been part of a value engineering process.
Right. And it goes on, this applies to projects at both pre-tender and pre-start stages. With the qualification you've made in relation to value engineering, is that correct?
This applies to both. Yeah, I was very rarely involved in pre-tender.
Right. Can you explain how this CV, which was presented to the TMO in order to win the project by Ryden, contained so many inaccuracies in respect of your CV?
I can't.
No. Okay. You say in your witness statement, and it's paragraph 13 if you need it, and I don't think we need to go back to it, that you wouldn't have been qualified to form a view on the compliance of designs. Is that correct?
Correct.
Were you involved in any way with the value engineering process on this project? Were you aware that Ryden did have to find cost savings for its client, the TMO, on this project?
I was aware that value engineering has been talked about, yes.
Right. Can I ask you to look at your statement, please? RYD 000942221. And I'd like to look with you, please, at paragraph 17. This is at the end of paragraph 17. This is page 9. And you say there, second line from the top, however, I was aware from meetings I attended, you see that?
Yep.
That there was a significant cost saving to be had for KCTMO. I recall that there were discussions ongoing regarding the choice of colour and the method of fixing of the cladding panels, but not the choice of aluminium or zinc. Were you involved in those discussions or aware of those discussions while design changes were being discussed?
Sorry, I don't.
Well, were you involved in any of the meetings when the design changes were being discussed?
This would be discussed at a monthly meeting, so it would just be like an item, but there would be separate meetings on that with a surveying team.
I see. And you say there that there was a significant cost saving to be had for KCTMO. Now, given that, did you appreciate that a change in the cladding rain screen from zinc to ACM was a value engineering decision?
At the time, no.
Right. And I think from what you've told us before, you yourself made no contribution, so far as technical expertise is concerned, to this value engineering discussion that you refer to.
No.
Did you yourself ever raise, during these discussions, the issue of fire safety?
I don't think so. I don't recall.
Right. Did you take any steps in your role as project manager to ensure that the budgets were met? We touched on this before.
Not particularly, no. I mean, I was there for programming and sequencing. I mean, there was people running the budget, and they would generally hire the subcontractors, after like a mini tender, I presume. So that part of the budget would already be done before they got to site.
Right. On site, were you involved in any cost-cutting decisions?
No.
Okay. So far as you're aware, as project manager, were any cost-cutting decisions made on site?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Can I ask you to turn back to page 2 of your witness statement, please? And at the top of that page, we can see paragraph 3. You say, 5 lines down, I decided to leave Ryden in July 2015 to work for another company. I believe the last day I was the project manager on site was Thursday, the 23rd of July 2015, so precisely 5 years ago, apart from a few days during the first week of August 2015, when I was asked to return to Grenfell to provide holiday cover. I was transferred to another project at Lee Bridge between July and September 2015. I left the company in September 2015 after working out my notice period. Why did you leave Ryden, Mr. O'Connor?
I was given an opportunity to go. There was a lot of pressures at the project at Grenfell. We was falling behind program. There's a lot of pressure, and I was given the opportunity to join another company for significantly more money, and another opportunity.
You say there was a lot of pressures at the project at Grenfell. Is that in the summer of 2015?
Yeah, I just think leading up to, I mean, I'm sure you've seen, it started to fall behind programme. But when that happens, pressure happens when you've got to try and meet programmes.
Right. Can you help us with what other pressures were present on site during this project at that time?
Extremely long days. Just a lot of pressure. I was, it was affecting my home life. When I was given the opportunity to leave, I didn't take it easily. I'd been there a long time, but the opportunity I was given was I couldn't really turn it down.
Did you feel at the time that you were being given support and help to be able to execute your role to the best of your ability at that time?
Yeah, I was being given support. I mean, I think we would all agree we can all have more support, but I was doing the best to complete my job.
Now, can I turn to a completely different topic? And I want to ask you about your awareness of different types of cladding and other fires. At the time of the Grenfell Tower project, were you aware of the different kinds of cladding panels that were available in the UK?
No.
So you weren't aware that cladding panels were made with a variety of different materials, including metals and metal composites?
At the time, no.
No. At the time, had you heard of the expression ACM, aluminium composite material?
No, I hadn't.
Even though you had been involved on the Chalkerts estate project?
Yeah, I didn't. I had nothing to do with the cladding at all. I didn't even go on the scaffold.
Right. So does it follow from that you wouldn't know and didn't know at the time that ACM material frequently contained a core made from polyethylene or PE?
At the time, no.
Right. And also that panels came with, or some of them came with fire retardant cores which were less combustible.
Again, at the time, no. I wouldn't know. No.
To your knowledge, was there any general awareness within Ryden as the company about the availability of these different panels and different kinds of core?
I don't know.
You don't know. Were you aware of any major fires that had occurred in residential buildings, either in the United Kingdom or elsewhere in the world, involving cladding?
I don't believe so.
Were you aware, or had you heard of the fire at Lacknell House in Southwark in the summer of 2009?
Yes.
You had?
Yes.
Can you explain how you came to be aware of that fire?
By the news.
By the news. At the time of the fire? Or
Yeah, I think it would have been at the time of the fire. That's when it would have been on the news.
Right.
I think as well we had there might have been something sent round in the company, but I can't be sure of that.
Right. When something, I know you can't be sure of it. No, I'm asking you to remember more than 10 years ago. But when something, can you remember when something was sent round within the company?
I can't. It would have been a memo, but I couldn't tell you when or even if it happened.
Right. So you couldn't tell me what the memo said.
Absolutely not.
Was there any training or continuing professional development organised by Ryden in the aftermath of the Lacknell House fire? Do you remember?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
That was 2009. Were you aware that there had been a spate of fires in high-rise buildings in the UAE in 2012 and 13?
No, I wasn't aware.
Or a fire in France, in Roubaix in France in 2012?
No.
No. And do I take it from that you were also unaware of the history of high-rise fires in the UK, stretching back to 1991, Knowsley Heights, 1999, Garnet Court?
None of them ring a bell to me at all.
Right. You've heard of them since, have you?
Them two you just mentioned, no.
Right, okay. I want to ask you about panels and see how much you knew at the time about that. At the time of the project and your involvement in it, did you know that the fire performance of ACM polyethylene panels, when made into cassettes, performed significantly worse than the fire performance of panels in the flat sheet riveted?
I wasn't aware, no.
I want to go back to your contractual obligations, or rather Ryden's contractual obligations. We touched on this earlier on. I think you'd said you'd had very little familiarity of that. Looking at your role as project manager, leading the on-site team, do you accept that you had to be at least familiar with the main contractual obligations that Ryden owe to its client?
I wouldn't say I would need to be familiar with it. My role was on site, health and safety, sequencing, coordinating. I wouldn't be quoting the contract to anybody.
Right. You wouldn't be quoting the contract to anybody, I quite understand, but would you want to make sure that you knew, at least an outline, what Ryden had promised its client it would do by way of this refurbishment?
I probably should have done, yes.
But you didn't? Right. Was the contract physically held on site in one of the site offices?
I couldn't tell you. I don't recall it being on site, but...
Right. So during your time on site, did no occasion arise when you thought you needed to look at the contract to make sure whether you had to do something or didn't have to do something?
I would ask Simon Lawrence, Steve Blake. I wouldn't ever refer to the contract myself, no.
Right. Can you remember any occasion when you did ask Steve Blake or Simon Lawrence about what the contract said you had to do or didn't have to do?
I don't recall.
All right. Did you understand that as the design and build contractor, Ryden, as a company, retained ultimate responsibility for the design of the Grenfell Tower refurbishment and the works related to it?
At the time, no. I presumed that responsibility would be passed on to the designers and architects. I didn't believe that would stay with Ryden at the time.
Oh, I see. So from that answer, you say, I presume, at the time, what was your understanding about Ryden's responsibility?
Sorry, I don't understand.
Well, you said in the last answer, but one, I presume that responsibility would be passed on to the designers and architects. I don't believe that stayed with Ryden at the time. So at the time, was your understanding that Ryden actually had no responsibility at all because it had appointed subcontractors?
I wouldn't say it had no responsibility at all, but I thought that responsibility was shared throughout the specialist subcontractors to be compliant with what it needed to be compliant with.
Right. So would it follow from that you didn't think at the time that if the subcontractors had done something wrong, nonetheless Ryden would be responsible to the TMO for the error?
I suppose as the principal contractor, probably yes.
Right. Did you understand that Ryden was responsible for carrying out and completing the works in a proper and workmanlike manner?
Yes.
And did you understand that Ryden was responsible for carrying out and completing the works in accordance with statutory requirements?
Yes.
And in accordance with good building practice?
I think that forms part of the statutory requirements, isn't it?
Now, you were responsible for monitoring the inspection process, I think. So, did you know at the time that there were various bodies within the construction industry which produced guides to establishing good practice, good building practice?
I would have been aware.
Yes. Did you read any of those guides? Were you familiar with them?
Not that I recall.
Right. Now, statutory requirements would include the building regulations, wouldn't it?
Yes.
So did you understand at the time that Ryden was fully responsible in all aspects for the design of the works?
Probably not. I thought that would be the specialist designers to ensure that all of the drawings and designs they put forward comply with the legislation at that time.
And what was Ryden's role in that? Do you remember?
Ryden's role in what, sorry?
In ensuring that all of the drawings and designs that the specialist designers put forward complied with the legislation?
I would presume that would be part of the contract between the designers and the architects and everyone else. I would imagine there'd be a line in there to say all your designs must comply with X, Y, and Z.
Right. Now, can I take you to your witness statement, paragraph 14? You say there that there were design team meetings throughout my time working on the project. I would be present for most of these meetings, but not all of them, so that I was aware of any discussions taking place from a logistics, programming and progress perspective, and so that I, as project manager, I could make sure things were happening at the right time on site. And I read that to you earlier on. Slightly different question. Did you yourself ever investigate whether Ryden was complying with those obligations, the obligations we've discussed?
I didn't.
Do you remember or know whether any other employee of Ryden involved with this project was investigating whether Ryden was complying with those obligations?
I don't know.
You don't know. I'm going to ask you a number of questions about the adequacy of drawings, but I suspect these won't be very long questions. When Ryden came into the project in the spring of 2014, and I know you joined the project in the May of that year, and just for your benefit, the tender had been successful and Ryden had been notified in the middle of March 2014. And then the contract terms began to be discussed in the April of 2014. That's the background. When you came into the project, what stage did you believe design had reached?
Of the whole refurbishment, or just the external?
Of the whole of the refurbishment.
60-70%.
Right. Are you able to tell us what that is in RIBA terms? What stage? Stage no. C, D, E, F?
I wouldn't be able to say.
Are you familiar with those RIBA stages?
No.
Right. Now, at paragraph 13 of the statement, your statement, if you can go back a little bit, please, you say there, in the first sentence, by the time Ryden became involved in the project, the design by KCTMO and Studio E was at an advanced stage. Now, when you came into the project, had you seen or did you see any 1 to 5 scale drawings?
There were a number of drawings, yes.
Yes. Did you see any 1 to 5 scale drawings?
I can't remember the scale, to be
Right.
honest.
Do you remember seeing any, let me put it this way, big detailed drawings produced by Studio E showing, for example, the details of cavity barriers around the windows?
I don't specifically remember seeing them, no.
No. What is the basis for your saying that when Ryden became involved in the project, the design was at an advanced stage? What gave you to think that the design was at an advanced stage?
Because the majority of the work for me would have been the external overclad, which I believe had already been decided as to what it would be. It was just basically a colour and fixings point of view, and I believe that JS Wright were working on design. That's why I said 60-70% through, which I think is quite an advanced stage.
Right. Did you think that the drawings you saw at that stage were sufficient for you to be able to progress or coordinate the progression of the works on site?
I don't recall.
Do you ever recall thinking that the designs were inadequate for your purposes?
No, I don't recall that either.
You never had an occasion to wonder about whether the drawings actually helped you or not?
I mean, if there was glaringly obvious things missing from the drawing, then yes, but no, other than that.
Do you remember any occasion when you did see something that to your eyes was glaringly obviously missing from a drawing?
I think there was once a door missing from a room.
Right.
If I'm honest, and that was it.
Right. And when you say glaringly obvious, is that an example of the kind of thing you mean?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, is the reality, Mr. O'Connor, that you weren't sufficiently qualified to assess what stage the design had reached or to notice any material or important omissions other
Yes.
than those that are glaringly obvious in the way you
Yes.
described? Yes. Can I then talk about, or ask you about workmanship? Were you familiar with Ryden's, even in outline, Ryden's contractual obligations relating to workmanship and materials?
In what manner?
Well, I don't want to go back to the contract, but were you aware that Ryden was obliged, and for our purposes this is clause 2.2.1, to make sure that all materials, goods and workmanship used in the execution of the works shall be of such kind and of such quality as are necessary to enable the contractor to comply with his obligation under this contract? I know that's a bit of legalese, but were you aware, at least in outline, that that was an obligation Ryden had assumed to the TMO?
I wasn't aware of that clause or that wording. Workmanship to me is, finishes and making sure it's done in line with the drawings, not... I don't recall that contract clause at all.
What was your understanding about whether Ryden could make substitution for any materials or goods or workmanship which had been set out in the employer's requirements?
I think that would need to go back to Studio E if there was going to be some sort of change.
Right.
And TMO, I imagine, as well.
I see. So in outline, can we take it, as far as you understood, any substitution of materials, goods or workmanship could only happen with the permission of Studio E and the TMO?
Yes.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just trying to
Yes.
clarify or crystallise your answer. I see. So far as you are aware, what system was in place within Ryden to make sure that any substitution that I've just asked you about happened so that the TMO and Studio E knew about it and could give their consent?
I think there was a change tracker.
Right. Did you yourself put in place, or did you know that there was in place any system for monitoring whether materials were being substituted in the order chain or on site?
No.
Was there a process in place for obtaining the consent from the TMO for materials substitution?
That would again be the change tracker,
The
I would
change
imagine.
tracker, right. Was there a system in place for checking that any new materials complied with the statutory requirements? When I say new, I mean substituted materials complied with the statutory requirements.
I would envisage that to be something that Studio E would have looked at when a new material was put forward.
But that's not something you looked at?
It's not something I looked at, no.
No. Was there a system that you knew of whereby it could be checked whether building control were kept informed of changes to material on site?
I don't recall. They may have been sent a change tracker by Simon. I don't recall.
You don't know?
Can I ask you this? Who was responsible for checking materials coming onto the site?
It would have been the subcontractors. So they ordered their own materials. It would have been brought in through the rear gate by one of the marshals.
Yeah.
But if you're asking if one of the managers was there to sign it off as it came in, no.
Yeah. Well, that is what I was asking, because what was going through my mind was if a lorry load of the substitute material came in, who would be aware of that and who would control it? But your answer, I think, is it would be the subcontractor.
Yes.
Thank you.
Does that tell us that even though the subcontractors would know that a lorry load of substitute material had come in, there was no system for them reporting that to the Ryden site managers and from them to you?
I don't believe there was a system in place, but they were, as I've understood it, they were tried and tested, trusted subcontractors. So if there was going to be a change, then it would have been discussed with Simon, Studio E and the TMO.
Yes. Really what I'm trying to get at, just to pursue the chairman's question a bit, is whether there was is how high within the Ryden chain of command knowledge of what was coming onto site through the rear gates went. But I think you're telling us it didn't come as high as you.
Not generally, no. I mean, I wouldn't be there for someone to say, "Oh, we've just had a lorry load of this turn up."
Right.
That wasn't my role.
Right. I'd like to ask you some questions about the employer's requirements, and to begin with the preliminaries. Can I ask you just in general terms, were you familiar with, at least in passing, with the employer's requirements for this project?
In passing, yes.
In passing. And is it fair to say that it was your role as project manager to coordinate the works?
Yes.
Yes. Can I ask you to look at TMO 1004171, please? And go to page 128 in that. This is part of, I should just tell you, Mr. O'Connor, the contract, the formal contract. And you can see page 1 of this document on the screen. I think there it is. We went past it, but there it is. Just looking at it now, is this a document you've ever seen before, do you think?
It doesn't look familiar.
No. No, and that's really what you told us earlier in your evidence. But let's just look if we can see page 128 and see if this is something you saw at the time. This is the section of the preliminaries entitled A32 Management of the Works. Did you, at the time, familiarise yourself with the requirements set out there, and particularly paragraph 110, supervision?
I don't recall if I read this or not.
Right. Let's just see if it jogs a memory. I mean, you could see that it's 128 pages into a pretty dense legal document, and it's entitled Supervision General. Accept responsibility for coordination, supervision, and administration of the works, including subcontracts. Coordination. Arrange and monitor a programme with each subcontractor, supplier, local authority, and statutory undertaker, and obtain and supply information as necessary for coordination of the work. That was Ryden's obligation to the TMO. Can you confirm that it was your responsibility within the chain of command at Ryden to ensure that Ryden complied with it?
Yes.
Can you tell us what you did to arrange and monitor a programme with each subcontractor, supplier, local authority, and statutory undertaker? You can see in the second bullet point.
I wouldn't have particularly dealt with the local authority. I'm not sure what a statutory undertaker is.
Someone who supplies water or gas.
Oh, right. So okay, fine. Yes, I wouldn't. I would have dealt with them. I would have arranged and monitored a programme, and I would have pretty coordinated the subcontractors. Yes.
Right. So when you say you would have arranged and monitored a programme with each subcontractor, how did you go about that?
We would sit down with the subcontractor and the relevant manager, and agree a monthly or weekly meeting. I wouldn't particularly go to these, but it was to monitor sort of their progress against programme, and ask them to put it in sort of almost like a mini report to us.
And you could see in the second bullet point it says that part of your job was to obtain and supply information as necessary for coordination of the work. What did you do to do that?
I would get the drawings and pass them on to the relevant managers.
Right. What about information relating to materials?
That would be on the drawing.
Were you only reliant on the drawing to find out what materials had to go onto the building when you were obtaining and supplying information as necessary for coordination of the work?
Well, I think most people had a copy of the NBS spec that I recall. I think most people would have had a copy of that on their computers. So if there was any queries, you can go to that.
Right. Well, we're going to come to the NBS spec in due course, but I know the answer. If you look at the foot of the page, 119B, building control, the contractor will be responsible for providing additional construction stage information to building control. See that?
Yep.
Did you appreciate at the time that was a part of something you were responsible for?
No.
Right. Was there any process in place, so far as you knew, to make sure Ryden had possession of any or all additional construction stage information so that it could be passed on to building control?
I believe that was being done by Studio E, Simon Lawrence.
Right. So it wouldn't pass through your hands.
It might pass through my hands in a CC on an email, but it's not something that I don't recall ever sending like building control construction stage information.
Right. Can we look at page 135 of the same document, please? This is the section A33 entitled Quality / Standards Control. And if you look at paragraph 170A, 2/3 of the way down the page, manufacturer's recommendations and instructions. And there it says, general, comply with the manufacturer's printed recommendations and instructions current on the date of the invitation to tender. Changes to recommendations or instructions, submit details. Ancillary products and accessories, use those supplied or recommended by main product manufacturer. Agreement certified products, comply with limitations, recommendations and requirements of relevant valid certificates. Can you tell us what systems Ryden had in place to make sure that Ryden's employees, such as yourself and your site managers and the subcontractors, were aware of the manufacturer's printed recommendations and instructions?
I wouldn't be able to tell you that. We relied on, like I've said before, the specialists, the architects, to ensure that whatever they're putting forward is in line with that.
I see. So would it follow from that you also had or you can't help us as to whether there was in place a system for making sure that Ryden employees and subcontractors complied with manufacturers' printed instructions and recommendations?
I can't guarantee that, no.
No. If we look on at page 139, please, let's look at paragraph 510. Supervision. This is under the title Supervision / Inspection / Defective Work. That fell within your remit, didn't it?
Yes.
And you can see it says, general, in addition to the constant management and supervision of the works provided by the contractor's person in charge, all significant types of work must be under the close control of competent trade supervisors to ensure maintenance of satisfactory quality and progress. Replacement, give maximum possible notice before changing person in charge or site agent. Now, the contractor's person in charge that we see there, was that the project manager, i.e. you?
The principal contractor, is that what we're referring to?
Well, 510, I'm looking at 510 and the reference to the contractor's person in charge.
It would have been me or Simon, yes.
I see. Did you understand that role was occupied by you? When you say it was me or Simon, do you mean you alternated in that role, or that you're not sure whether the role was yours or his?
I think this role probably would have been passed on to a site manager, because they were out on the ground, so to speak, checking quality alongside the clerk of works.
Were there any processes in place at Ryden to make sure that significant types of work would be under the close control of competent trade supervisors?
There was competent trade supervisors for most of the contractors, yes.
What are competent trade supervisors? Who were they in this context?
I think from memory we had Ben Bailey from Harley. Am I okay naming these people? Yeah.
Yes, you can.
Of course, yes.
So Ben Bailey from Harley. I don't remember Richard from JSW. And I can't remember the name of the electrical.
Taking Ben Bailey was the younger Bailey at Harley, wasn't he?
He was.
And in the role of a competent trade supervisor, he would be essentially supervising the work of his own company, wouldn't he?
Yes.
How would that be proper and adequate supervision?
Well, we also had external managers as well.
Right. Okay. Did Ryden, and specifically you, assess the competency of trade supervisors in this context?
No. They would, especially Harley, as far as I was aware, they've worked with Ryden for a number of years and were considered competent at the
Right.
time.
You refer to external managers. Who are you referring to?
Daniel Osgood was one of them.
He's a Ryden employee, isn't he?
Yeah, there was a few that come and go. It was quite a...
Yes, I understand that. But taking Daniel Osgood as an example, he's a Ryden employee. So are you saying that by external managers, those were Ryden people
Yes.
being trade supervisors?
Yeah, so basically what would happen is they would install a section of work. It would then be snagged by them, and then it would be offered to a Ryden supervisor, or manager, site manager, sorry, and then it would then be offered to the clerk of works for inspection prior to it being covered up or anything being covered up.
I see. Can I ask you to look at page 141 and paragraph 630 in this same document? Quality control, you see that there, and it says procedures, establish and maintain to ensure that works, including the work of subcontractors, comply with specified requirements. Records, maintain full records, keep copies on site for inspection and submit copies on request. And then content of records, and you can see the 4 bullet point requirements set out under there. Identification of the element, item, batch or lot, including location, nature and dates of inspections, tests and approvals, nature and extent of non-conforming work found, details of corrective action. Were there any procedures in place at Ryden for establishing and maintaining a system where works complied with these specified requirements?
So the dates and everything you've just read, yes, there was. Yes, it would be on the RMS system, and it would be just a log of when it was inspected by us, when it was inspected by building control, if there was any negative or positive comments from building control, and that would have all been kept on site.
What is the RMS system?
Ryden management system.
Is that an electronic database?
Yes,
Did you have access to that?
everyone did. Yeah.
Right. Did you use it?
Yes.
Did you use it regularly?
Yes.
What did you do when using it?
There were sections in there that I needed to do on a daily basis to keep the records up to date.
Right.
I can't recall exactly what they were. It was a long time ago.
I see. So what would you input into that system, generally speaking?
Probably like a daily diary, maybe. From my point of view, subcontractor performance, maybe how many men were on site for. Just it was general data that I would be putting into there.
Right. Now, can we leave this document and go to paragraph 20 of your witness statement? You say there that you would, and this is, you say the process for the inspection of works was as follows. Ryden site managers would be inspecting the area of work that they were responsible for on a daily basis. And then you go on to give a bit of detail about what they did, and then 2/3 of the way down that paragraph you say, I would try to do a couple of rounds of the site each day, looking at the site in general, checking progress overall, the contractors working in the areas that they should be, and looking out for any health and safety issues. However, as the project manager, it was not part of my role to inspect in detail the work being carried out. Did you make any records of your inspections that you refer to there?
I don't recall. I know there was emails sent after some of them because we had seen stuff that we wasn't happy with, but I wouldn't have come back and wrote a report each time I went out.
Right, I see. Did you keep a daily log or daily diary or report of your own, either yourself or on the RMS system, about what you did on your rounds?
There would have been a handwritten diary, yes.
Right, a handwritten diary.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know what happened to that?
It was on site when I left.
Right. And was that a diary personal or private to you, or was that a diary that was shared by others on site?
It was just my diary for the day, just so as I could record anything of importance.
Okay. Still on the subject of inspections and quality control, can I now turn to the NBS specification that you referred to before, which we'll find at SEA 50169. and I'd like to go within it to page 68, please. This is section H92. This one is dated the 30th of January 2014. This is the last edition of it before Ryden won the tender. Just looking at the first page of this, you can see it's NBS specification. Just go back to that, just to jog the memory. This is the document you were referring to earlier. Can we go to page 68 then, please, which is section H92. Under general requirements, stroke preparatory work. You can see at the very bottom of the page, this is H92 rain screen cladding. Yes?
Yep.
So this is part of the MBS spec that deals with rain screen cladding. Now, you can see at paragraph 232 at the bottom, quality plan, requirement, submit during detailed design, content in accordance with BS-EN ISO 9001 and including the following. And you've got the name of the quality manager, quality assessment procedures and inspection procedures to be adopted in checking the work. And then if you go a little bit further down to the second from one entry at the bottom, certification that completed work complied with the specification. See that?
I do.
Did those things fall within your responsibility as project manager?
I don't believe so.
Whose responsibility or whose remit did they fall within?
I think there would be various. So there's things like procedure for registering and reporting non-compliances. That could be any of the managers. Managing procedures and calibration records, again, that could be any of the managers.
Right.
Certification that completed works comply with specification. I've not seen a certificate like that.
Right, okay. Were you familiar at the time with BS-EN ISO 9001?
At the time, no.
It says there, name of the quality manager. Who was or who were the quality manager or managers during the
Quality managers would have been someone from the office that would come down and then audit the site.
I see. Someone from the office. During your time, do you remember who that was?
I want to say Barry Rutley.
Okay. And how often did Barry come down to audit the site?
I couldn't be sure. It might have been monthly, it may have been bi-monthly.
Do you know what he did?
He would come to site with a template check sheet which he needed to go through, which I think went through the drawings as long as we had all the RAMs for the subcontractors, they're up to date. I think he would check the electrical certificates and stuff like that.
Right.
But I don't recall much more than that.
Did he look at individual instances of workmanship, or was he auditing the records?
He was auditing the records.
So he didn't go and look at anything physical on the site?
He would have done, just for his own knowledge, but he wouldn't. I don't think he would have commented on it.
What was he looking for, do you know?
I think it's just to see the progress, really.
I see. Right, I see. Was it your job to ensure that quality assessment procedures were put in place in accordance with EN ISO 9001?
We did have quality assurance in there, but I wouldn't know if it'd be in line with BSEN.
No, but was it your job to ensure, even if you didn't know about BSEN, was it your job to ensure that quality assessment procedures were in place for the project?
Yes.
Yes, I see. Was it your job to check that those quality assessment procedures were carried out?
Yes.
And
essentially, yes. Yeah.
And carried out adequately?
Well, I mean, I would go on what, the managers would take the clerk of works or building control, whoever out. They would come back with a report, and I would have a chat with the relevant person when they come back to the office. And then that would be noted, in a relevant place.
I see. And was it your job to ensure that proper inspection procedures were in place?
It wouldn't be my job directly. It'd be someone that I would, if it was an external manager, then there would be a procedure in place for inspecting the externals. But it wouldn't be me doing it.
Would it be you supervising those inspections?
I'd be overseeing the people doing them, yes.
Right. When you say external manager, do you know who the external manager was who was responsible for the inspection, for establishing the inspection procedures to be adopted in checking the work?
At the time, it would have been Daniel Osgood.
Daniel Osgood. So just so I'm completely clear on your answer, if you look back at the document, 232 quality plan, third bullet point down, inspection procedures to be adopted in checking the work. Who was it who established those inspection procedures?
Well, I would have sat down with a subcontractor and the relevant manager and had put a plan forward, i.e., inspecting every week or every few days or whatever it would have been required.
Did you ever give any written instructions to site managers in relation to inspection of the works?
I did, yes.
You did. And how would those written instructions?
They were minuted. It was a meeting on the externals with Harley, and I requested marked up elevations on a weekly basis to go to the relevant manager.
Marked up by whom?
Marked up by Harley.
What kind of markup? When you say elevations, do you mean drawings?
Yeah.
So marked up. What sort of markups would Harley put on the drawings on a weekly basis?
They would colour code where they'd been, and each colour would have a different. I'm colourblind, so but each colour would be like insulation was on here, or rails were on here, or brackets were on there.
Right. So the marked up elevations were. Sounds as if what you're telling us is that the marked up elevations that Harley produced were about progress rather than about the design itself.
Yes.
So did you ever see any marked up drawings where design was changed?
No.
Right.
Not I recall.
I see. Did you produce a method statement on inspection of the works?
Not a method statement, no. It's not something we ever did.
Did you give any training to site managers who were reporting to you about how they should go about inspecting any part of the works?
Not actual training. I'm not qualified to train people how to inspect stuff. I mean, they've been with the majority of people there, other than I think the two people we mentioned, have been with the company a fair while.
Can you look at paragraph 21 of your witness statement, please? So we just go back to that. This is at page 10. You say there was also a system for inspecting works on completion of a particular section. In relation to the external cladding works, for example, completed areas of substructure would be inspected before the installation of the cladding. The subcontractor's supervisor would first inspect their work against the relevant drawings before it was handed over to Ryden's site managers. See that there?
Yep.
I was not involved in the inspections myself, but I know from my time as site manager that the Ryden site manager would also inspect the subcontractor's work using the relevant specifications and drawings. Just pausing there, is it fair to say that your understanding was that all works would be inspected by subcontractors under their internal processes after it was completed?
At the relevant stages, not after it was completed.
Okay. And then at those relevant stages, Ryden would then conduct its own inspection?
Yes.
Yes.
And then building control and the clerk of works would be offered to come and inspect that work as well.
Yes. And just to confirm what you say in the second line at the top of page 11, the checks were made against the relevant specifications and drawings, yes?
Generally, yes.
To what extent were you involved yourself in remedying workmanship issues which might arise from those inspections?
I wouldn't have been involved particularly unless it become a problem. Them inspections, our comments would go back to the relevant subcontractors, and they would be asked to resubmit the inspection once they'd completed the works, i.e. the stuff that needed to be put right.
I follow. And I see. When we talk about the drawings here, are we talking about the as-built drawings issued by Studio E after revisions from the design team, or other drawings?
They wouldn't be as-built drawings, get them at the end. It would be construction drawings.
Construction drawings. And is it right that the relevant drawing to be used by whoever was undertaking the inspection would be identified by a unique number given to each drawing?
Yes.
Right.
And probably checked with the drawing register as well prior to going out.
Which drawing register?
The drawing registers that were in the files.
Who was responsible for compiling and maintaining the drawing register that was in your files?
Simon Lawrence would have done it.
I see. During your time on the project, was there always a drawing register that you've just referred to?
Yeah.
Do you know when it was first established?
I don't. It would have been pre-me because I think Studio E obviously started the process of drawings and drawing registers alongside the original contractors. So,
yes. Mr. Chairman, it's 11:15 and I've got about
Yes.
4 questions left on this topic.
Well, why don't you finish them, and we'll break then.
Very good. Mr. Lawrence, Mr. O'Connor, I'm so sorry, Mr. O'Connor. Can I just ask you to go back to paragraph 21, where you say, in the third line, if anything was snagged during this inspection, it would be desnagged and then re-inspected before the work was handed over to the Clerk of Works to inspect on behalf of KCTMO. As far as I'm aware, the Clerk of Works followed exactly the same process of comparing the works with the drawings and specifications. If anything was snagged by the Clerks of Works, Ryden would ask the relevant subcontractor to rectify it. The Clerks of Works would then either re-inspect the work or ask for the photographic evidence to show what had been done. In the light of that statement, is it fair to say that it was your understanding at the time that quality inspections, beyond those undertaken by the subcontractor during the initial construction, such as by the Clerk of Works, were also conducted against drawings?
yes.
Which drawings? Were they the as-built drawings or were they drawings at an earlier stage?
Construction drawings.
Construction drawings. And just so that we're clear, the construction drawings, are those the ones marked approved for construction by Harley? When we're looking at the external cladding, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect to see it stamped by Studio E as well.
Yeah. Can I then just ask you to look at a witness statement of Jason North? And before I do, just get you to confirm, Jason North was a site manager working for Ryden on the Grenfell Tower project, wasn't he?
He was.
And was he answerable to you?
He was.
He was. This is RYD 3094233. This is the first page of his statement. I'd like you to go to the second page of his statement, please, and paragraph 13 within it. And he says there, the contractors undertook the work. My role was to ensure that they did it on time, to budget and safely. There was a quality control system in place. Once the work was complete, the foreman of the contractor checked for snags and remedied these. Then the work was handed to me and I checked for further snags which were remedied by the contractor if identified. The Clerk of Works then checked the work, and lastly, Building Control carried out its own inspections where required. My checks also included checking health and safety and that the work adhered to the drawings. Does that accord with your understanding of how Ryden's site managers conducted quality inspections of the works?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Mr. O'Connor, I'm going to ask the chairman if we can take the break now. Mr.
Yes,
Chairman.
at a convenient point.
Yes, thank you.
We're going to have a break now, Mr. O'Connor.
Thank you.
And I'm going to ask you to go with the usher in just a moment. Before you do that, can I just say, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room.
Yeah, no worries.
All right? Thank you. Would you like to go? Oh, we'll come back at 25 to 12. Thank you very much. Good. Thank you. 25 to 12. Yes. Yes, would you ask Mr. O'Connor to come back, please? Thank you. Ready to carry on, Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. O'Connor, you told us this morning earlier that you were responsible for health and safety on site. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yes. How could you ensure health and safety on site if you did not know yourself what, by way of materials, was being delivered to site at any given time?
That's not really relevant to health and safety, as in my role in health and safety. Is the work being carried out in a safe manner? Are they doing what's in their risk assessment method statements? That was my sort of role in health and safety.
Was your role in health and safety not also to include ensuring that there were no dangerous materials stored on site?
I wouldn't say so, no.
Right. How, if you were responsible for health and safety on site, were you to discharge that function, carry out that role, if you didn't know whether there were or weren't any dangerous materials on site?
Like I said, my role was around the construction work, not what was coming onto site. As far as I knew, we had no dangerous materials on site.
How could you be sure that suppliers were supplying material that did not present an unreasonable health and safety risk?
Sorry, I don't understand that question.
Well, if you were responsible for health and safety on the site, but you didn't know what was coming onto site, how could you be sure that suppliers were supplying materials to site that did not present a health and safety risk?
Because I would presume that risk would have been taken out during the design stage. So I don't really understand your question particularly.
So is it that you assumed that everything being delivered to site was safe?
Yeah.
Right. Now, I think you said that you didn't do a method statement. To be clear, does that mean that you didn't do a risk assessment method statement, an RAMS, for the site?
No, there was one done for the site. There wasn't one. What I said was there wasn't one done for the inspection process.
I see. Forgive me. There wasn't one done for the inspection process, but you say there was one done for the site.
Yeah.
Yes, I see. Paragraph 13 of your statement, I think you said, we don't need to go to it unless you want to, that you believe that the specialist subcontractors engaged by Ryden who designed the works would have been selected for the project from an approved list held by Ryden. Is that right?
Yes.
And I think your understanding was that the subcontractors had to be vetted first before being added to the approved subcontractor list.
Yes.
That's right, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I don't think you've shown us the approved list. Is there an actual list, written document?
Yes.
Right. And you were familiar with it at the time, were you?
Yeah, would have been, yeah.
Do you know where it was held in Ryden?
Would have been on the RMS.
Right. Did you yourself personally check that any of the subcontractors used for the Grenfell Tower project were on the approved list?
No, that would have been done by the surveyor prior to them being engaged.
The surveyor being who?
Adam Marriott,
Right.
Zach Maynard. I think there was one other as well. I can't remember the name.
You said Zach Maynard. And
Adam Marriott, Zach Maynard. There was a few.
Right. So when you came into the project, did you ask either Adam Marriott or Zach Maynard, or this third person, or fourth person perhaps, whether they had checked that the subcontractors being used for this project were on the approved list?
I hadn't, but I knew that JS Wright and Harley's had worked for Ryden on a number of occasions.
Right. I think you've referred to a vetting process. What was the vetting process? What did that involve? Do you know?
I don't know.
Right. Did you yourself take any steps to check and ensure that each of the subcontractors that was chosen by Harley to work on this project were competent and suitable for the work that they were to carry out?
Chosen by Harley, sorry.
Yeah, chosen by Ryden. I'm sorry, you're right, I said chosen by Harley. I meant chosen by Ryden. I'm sorry.
No.
No. Would it follow that you, and indeed Ryden, didn't take steps to check and make sure that each subcontractor or sub-consultant was actually carrying out their obligations fully, properly and competently?
Obligations in what sense?
Or
Or,
obligations under the contract that each subcontractor and subconsultant had with Ryden?
I would imagine that they would have been. That's why we was doing our checks.
So the inspection process is...
Yeah.
I see. Can I then ask you to go back to the NVS specification, SEA 50169, and go to page 69 this time? This is the NVS specification part dealing with the rain screen, H92, Mr. O'Connor. And let's look together at paragraph 235 at the top of the page. Information to be provided...
Mr. Millett, I'm not sure this is part of the rain screen cladding. I think that may be a heading which goes on to the next page. Oh, we've gone on to the next page now, have we?
it should be page 69, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, right, thank you.
So just to be clear, H92 I get from the bottom of the page, Mr. O'Connor, rain screen cladding, and it starts some pages earlier.
Yes,
235, information to be provided. It then says under that, submit the following cladding particulars, and there are 6 bullet points. Detailed drawings to fully describe fabrication and installation, detailed calculations to provide compliance with design/performance requirements, project-specific fabrication, handling and installation method statements, certification for incorporated components manufactured by others, confirming their suitability for proposed locations in the rain screen cladding, recommendations for spare parts for future repairs or replacements, recommendations for safe dismantling and recycling or disposal of products. Now, I've read those all out to you. What processes were in place, so far as you understood at the time, to make sure that Ryden gathered each of those elements of required information and passed those to the TMO?
I wouldn't know. That wouldn't be part of my process.
Wouldn't be part of your process. Who within Ryden would that fall to?
That would probably fall to Steve Blake, Simon Lawrence, someone that was part of the design intent.
Were you ever asked to provide or obtain detailed drawings to fully describe fabrication and installation?
I don't believe so.
Were you ever asked to provide any of this information?
I don't believe so.
Let's look lower down the page together, paragraph 342. Contractor's design of rain screen generally. And if we look at the second bullet point, it says design standard to CWCT, standard for systemized building envelopes, structural and fire requirements, and then they're set out there. And then underneath that, design, complete the design, or what's the third bullet point there? Design, complete the design in accordance with the designated code of practice to satisfy specified performance criteria. And then functional requirements as specified in this section with fire stopping to the requirements of the building regulations. Now, did you read that paragraph in the NBS spec at the time, do you think?
I don't recall.
You don't recall? Okay. Do you recall seeing at the time any mention of the CWCT standard for systemized building envelopes?
No.
At the time, do you think, had you ever heard of the CWCT standard for systemized building envelopes?
At the time, no.
At the time, no. So can we take it that you wouldn't have read it?
No.
And you wouldn't be familiar with any of its details? Right. So had you worked on any other projects where the CWCT standard had been a contractual standard for cladding?
Not that I'm aware of, no. That was
So-
my first cladding project.
Well, what about Chalcots?
I had nothing to do with cladding at Chalcots.
Right. You said that earlier, but do you remember? You don't remember any reference at all to CWCT on Chalcots?
No.
No. Now, I'd just like to ask you then about building regulations. As we can see there's a reference to the building regulations. I know you didn't read this, but at the time and in general terms, as at May 2014, were you familiar with the building regulations?
No, I was aware they were there, but I wasn't familiar in detail, no.
You weren't familiar in detail. Let's see how far your familiarity extends. Were you familiar with Schedule 1 to the building regulations and something called the functional requirements?
No.
No. So you didn't know about B, fire safety?
No. At the time, no.
No. Was there any system in Ryden to educate project managers about the requirements of the building regulations?
I don't believe so.
Right. And the next question I suspect will be an obvious one, but I feel I do have to ask you. Were you familiar at the time with approved document B?
No.
As forming part of the building regulations? Were you aware of the existence of any industry guidance about external wall construction, such as, and I'll just give you one or two examples, the Building Control Alliance's Technical Guidance Note 18 from June 2014 and June 2015?
No.
And what about right, all right. Well, let's ask then some questions and look together at the question of fire risk assessment. I'd like you to go to RYD 30s94213. This is Mr. Hughes's witness statement, David Hughes. He's coming to give evidence to the inquiry next week. I just want to ask you about one paragraph. This is paragraph 106, please, at page 24. He says here, project fire risk assessments, FRAs, are part of Ryden Group Safety, Health, Environmental and Quality, SHEQ procedures. The original one would have been done by the project manager, Simon O'Connor, at the start of the project on site. Its main focus is how to carry out the contracted works within the site, residential properties, communal and public spaces, and comply with the current regulations. It covers the scope of the works and those that might be affected by those works, including site visitors and residents. I just want to focus on where he says comply with the current regulations, as you can see there in the second from last sentence. Is what Mr. Hughes says here a fair assessment of the purpose of project FRAs?
I wouldn't say it would take into account the current regulations.
Right, so he's wrong about that, is he?
I'm not saying he's wrong, I would view it differently.
Well, how would you view the scope of project fire risk assessments then in relation to current regulations?
So the project fire risk assessment that I did alongside Simon Camps was for the bottom 4 floors of construction area.
So you didn't do a project fire risk assessment for the upper floors?
There would have been an overall one, which would be a template, but that wouldn't take into account regulations. That would take into account resident interaction probably more than regulation.
I see. And do you know who carried out that project fire risk assessment?
It'd probably be myself and Simon Camps.
I'm sorry, we may be at cross purposes. I'm talking about the project fire risk assessment for the rest of the building, including the upper floors. Not
Yeah, we
just
would have
the
done both, I imagine, but they would have been separate documents.
It would have been done by?
We would have done both.
I see.
But they would have been separate documents.
I see. Let's just see a document. RYD 3032404, just so that we're clear. This is a Ryden project fire risk assessment dated February 2015. And you can see from page 1 it says initial document completed by SC SOC. Is that Simon Camps and you?
Yes.
Is this the document you're referring to, do you think?
This would probably be the overall one, yes.
Let's go to page 2. project fire risk assessment, and we can see there in the first box, responsible person named for the project, contract manager or project manager, Simon O'Connor. So you were the responsible person, weren't you, for this?
During the construction period, yes.
And the risk assessor was Simon Camps?
Yes.
Yes, February 2015. And now if we turn to page 7, please, let's look together at that and look at paragraph 4.2, or section 4.2, under the heading Rapid Fire and Smoke Spread Through the Building, or Through Building. 4.2 says, the occupied units within the tower are rated to 1 hour fire protection. Existing fire stopping is in place. Where new penetrations are open, they have fire stopping installed by the end of the shift. Where permanent fire stopping is missing, Ryden to inform the client immediately. Now, the same words appear, as you can see, under 5.3, under the heading Occupied Premises, and this is under the overall heading Fire Spread to Adjacent Properties. Do you see that?
Yes.
So, can we take it from this document that you were aware of the need for fire stopping on the project?
I was aware that if we was drilling holes that go from the common parts into the flats, which we was, they needed to be fire stopped.
Right. Did you... let me ask it this way. You see the word fire stopping. Had you heard of the expression cavity barriers?
Yes.
Yes. Did you know that there was a difference between, or did you know there to be any difference between fire stopping and cavity barriers?
At the time, I wouldn't have classed them. I wouldn't have called them cavity barriers. We probably would have referred to them as fire breaks.
Fire breaks. Would there be a difference in your mind at the time between a fire stop and a fire break?
Yes.
And what was the difference?
A fire stop was installed to small areas where so pipes and stuff were cut through from common parts into flats, and that would be, I don't know, some sort of rock wall intermittent maybe, performed by a company that's qualified to do so. A fire stop, or cavity barrier as we're calling them, would be externally, I believe.
And what would fire barriers or fire cavity barriers be for?
Sorry?
What would be their role? What would a cavity barrier's role be?
Compartmentation.
Yes. Now, can I ask you to go back to page 3 of this document and look at section 3? This part of the FRA requires you to assess sources of fuel and oxygen, doesn't it?
Yes.
Now, if we look at page 5, this is your assessment, or yours and Mr. Camps's assessment of section 3. If we look under flammable solids, you see flammable solids on the middle section, in the middle section
Yes.
there. You can see that building materials have not been ticked. A number of things have been ticked, but building materials have not been ticked. Just the second entry from the bottom there.
Yep,
Do you see
I can
that?
see it, yep.
Is that? How did you decide that no building materials presented a source of fuel?
I think the building materials that we was referring to are bricks, blocks, concrete, things like that. I wouldn't consider them to be a source of fuel.
No, I just wonder what building materials means in this context. Does it not include the materials which are coming onto the building as part of the refurbishment?
I don't know.
Did you think about that at the time?
No, this would have been a point in time. So I don't even know if there was materials on the site at that point. I don't know.
This is February 2015, and whether the materials were yet on site or not. By this time, we know that Celotex was coming onto site at some point to form the insulation in the rain screen system, and ACM polyethylene core panels were coming onto site to form the rain screen as part of that system. My question is that given that those were going to be coming on, did you think at the time that they should be accounted for within the expression building materials when conducting this risk assessment?
I weren't aware at the time of their combustibility.
No, but that wasn't my question. The question was, given that those materials were going to be coming on to the building, did you think at the time that they should be accounted for within building materials when doing your risk assessment?
No, like I said, I see this as a point in time.
So when you say I see this as a point in time, do you say I look at the building as it stands today and look at what building materials are on site?
Well, I think that's what this is. This is at this moment this is what the risks are, and it gets introduced, it gets upgraded as and when things move on.
So this is a snapshot, is it? As of the date?
That's the way I understand it.
So do we take it from that you didn't, at the time at least of this report, think that the cladding materials coming onto site were not a source of fuel?
I didn't believe there was, no.
Right. Did you actually think about that at the time?
I don't recall, to be
All right.
honest.
Did you make any investigations, either at this time or when this was later updated, to make sure that the building materials that did come onto site, and particularly the insulation and the rain screen materials, didn't present a source of fuel?
I don't recall.
Right. How often was this document updated, do you know?
I don't know. I'm not going to say a monthly, I'm not going to say weekly, I don't know.
You don't know. How much work went into producing a project fire risk assessment like this?
A fair amount between me and Simon.
What did you do to do it?
Walked the site.
I see. So you just help me in terms of the process. You walk around site with a clipboard, and do you tick it off while you're going? It looks like it's done on a
Yeah, we would have had a
template.
We probably would have. This would have just been a template, and we would have had a hard copy with us, and it would probably just be a tick exercise, as you can see, and that's kind of how it was put together.
Right. And when asking the question, what are building materials, in that middle column there, how do you work out what's on site so that you can tick or untick that box accordingly?
Well, we was walking around site, so.
Right. And if there was a material which comes onto site you didn't know, you'd never seen before, or which wasn't commonly used, such as ACMP rain screen, as you told us you didn't think was commonly used, what would you do to satisfy yourself that it didn't present a source of fuel?
I don't recall, to be honest.
All right. I mean, if you're presented with a material you've never seen before, you don't know what it is, but you've got your clipboard in front of you and you're trying to work out, does this present a source of fuel? How would you go about finding that out?
Well, in hindsight, you'd probably go and Google it. I can't say I did that.
Right. Now, turning to a slightly different question, can I ask you to turn to RYD 43746? This is an email from Claire Williams to you dated the 10th of April 2015. Just wait for it to come up so we can see it together. Let me try the number again. RYD 4343476. Yes, there it is. Claire Williams, 10th of June 2015, 1639, to you. Urgent, urgent, urgent. Grenfell FRA outstanding items. And she says, and this is the second email down, 1719. Simon, I've gone back through the list and need just a few more bits. And if you look at the bottom of the page, under item 5, she says, I would recommend that the contractor provides, and then she sets out, I think, 4 things, and they go over the page. 1, the scope of works covering how this cladding, how will the cladding be fixed to the building? 2, what fixings will be used? 3, the fire rating of the cladding and the fixings. 4, the building control officer's acceptance of this fixing and the cladding used. Now, we've been unable to locate any response to this request from you. Do you think you did respond?
I probably would have forwarded this on to someone that could answer them questions.
Well, let's just go back to the first page and the email after this. You see, she sends you this email on the 10th of April, 10th of April 2015 at 17:19, and then she sends an email on the 10th of June 2015 to you, urgent, urgent, urgent. Simon, I think you could polish this off quickly, don't you? See you at 9:30 tomorrow. Can you remember what happened between April 15 and June 15? So as to prompt her to ask you to polish this off quickly.
I don't recall.
It looks from this as if you didn't answer her questions in the 2 months or so between the 10th of April and the 10th of June 2015. Would that be right?
I can't answer. I don't know.
When she asked you to polish this off quickly, do you remember what you did?
No.
Now, she says, just going back to the top of page 2 under item 3, the fire rating of the cladding and the fixings. That's what she wants to know about. Did you ever investigate those matters, the fire rating of the cladding and the fixings?
No, like I said, I would probably have forwarded this on to someone that was competent to answer the question.
Who would you have forwarded that to answer the question?
Probably Neil Crawford.
You don't remember doing that, do you?
I don't remember doing it, but that would what I would generally do if I got a question I couldn't answer. I would forward it on to someone who could.
Right. See, we haven't been able to find a response either to the April email or the 10th of email or any forwarding by you of these emails on. Can you explain that?
I can't.
No. I'd like to ask you some questions next about Celotex. Can we go please to RYD 3039499? This is an email from you to Simon Lawrence of the 22nd of April 2015, which we looked at with Mr. Lawrence when he was here giving evidence. And it says, Psi, the insulation type is as follows: Celotex RS 5080, aluminium foil facing, class BS 476, BS 8414 2005, PUEN 9165 2012, warehouse Celotex, Ipswich. Regards, Simon O'Connor, project manager. Do you remember the circumstances in which you sent this information to Mr. Lawrence?
I don't.
Do you know where you got the information from that you were passing on to him in this email?
I probably copied and pasted it from somewhere. It doesn't look like the sort of thing I would write or know.
It just to help you, this isn't in the NBS specification where one would expect to find it, namely page 73. We don't need to look at that. So you say you would have copied it and pasted it from somewhere. Do you know, or can you remember even roughly where you would have cut it and pasted it from?
I don't, to be honest.
Do you know, or can you remember why you sent this information to Mr. Lawrence?
I would imagine he'd ask me a question. It's not just sort of the email I would just send to him for no reason.
Right. Do you know what BS 476 is?
At that time, no, I didn't.
Right. Did you know what BS 8414 was?
At that time, no.
Did you understand there to be any difference between RS 5000 and RS 5080?
I don't recall at all.
So you can't really help us about
I don't recall
anything.
this email at all, and it's
Right.
doesn't even look like something I would write.
Do you recall, even in general terms, getting into the specifics of the specifications for insulation material?
Not particularly, no.
Not particularly, but at all?
I don't believe so.
All right. Can we look at RYD 3042091? This is an email from Simon Lawrence to you, Mr. O'Connor, and Danny Osgood of the 20th of May 2015. And you can see the subject matter is Grenfell rain screen EWI funding. And there's an attachment, RS5000 product datasheet, March 15 PDF. You see that?
I do.
And he says, gents, please see my response below to the client energy funding broker. And you can see the rest of what he says there. And the topic, just to put this in its context, is obtaining funding, essentially green funding. And the email below it is from Simon Lawrence to David Brissenden of the 20th of May, same day, earlier in the day, in relation to EWI funding. Do you remember whether you read or opened the product data sheet when you received this?
I don't recall opening it, no.
No. Can we look at it? It's RYD 3039507. Did you read this document at the time?
I don't recall reading it, no.
Leaving aside Mr. Lawrence's email of the 20th of May 2015, did you ever read this document while you were involved in the Grenfell Tower project?
I don't recall reading it, no.
Did you ever ask for it?
I wouldn't imagine so.
It says in the pink strap line at the very top of the document, suitable for buildings above 18 metres in height. Now, I know you say you didn't read this at the time. Did anybody ever tell you positively that this material, Celotex RS5000, was suitable for buildings above 18 metres in height?
Wouldn't have even crossed my mind because, I would have presumed everybody, all the specialists had gone through this.
Right. Did you or anybody else at Ryden, to your own knowledge at the time, talk directly to Celotex about whether the insulation material from Celotex was suitable for this project?
I don't remember talking to Celotex at all. I don't know if anybody else did.
I want to ask you some questions about a different insulation product, Kingspan Cool Firm K15. Have you heard of that product?
Yes.
Had you heard of it at the time?
I'd heard of Kingspan, but I wouldn't have put the K15 behind it.
Right, okay. If we can go back to the email that we were looking at a minute ago, which Mr. Lawrence sent to you and attached the data sheet, it's RYD 3042091. And he says there, to both of you, you and Mr. Osgood, he says in the last two lines, can you also ensure the attached external works inspection sheet is used? Obviously, you'll need to add to the checklist comments. Did you understand from this that you needed to make sure external works inspection sheets, like the one that's attached, were filled in?
No, I think that comment would have been aimed at Daniel, not me.
Oh, I see. Well, let's have a look at the checklist. It's RYD 3042087. And if you look at the fourth tick box, I think you'll need to go. Yeah, that's right. You'll look at the fourth. It's not really a tick box itself. It's an entry. You can see that it says check correct product is used. Yes, no. Do you see that?
Yep.
What tells you, or Danny Osgood for that matter, whether the product is correct?
The branding, I imagine.
The branding. Where would you get that from?
On the actual insulation board.
And what would you check the actual product against to make sure it was correct?
Against the drawings,
Against the drawings?
because the drawings would be annotated, wouldn't they?
Would the drawings you saw be annotated with specific product information?
I can't recall if they actually were, but that's general building.
When the documents of this nature were filled in, as per Mr. Lawrence's instruction, who was responsible for actually putting pen to paper and ticking the boxes?
Whoever was checking.
And who would that have been?
If this is externals, it would be one of the external managers, Daniel, or whoever else was looking after external at the time.
Right. Just to be clear about your use of the word externals, I think you don't mean external to Ryden, you mean external on the site.
I mean, yeah, the external facade, yeah.
External facade?
Yeah.
Right. So, to answer my question, I think you mean the site manager is responsible for that part of the project dealing with the exterior?
Yes.
Right. And they were answerable to you, yes? You were their line manager?
Yes.
Yes. So what did they do physically when ticking the yes or no box in respect of a particular product that comes in to make sure that it was or wasn't correct?
They would be out looking at the actual work installed, I would imagine.
But what documents in Ryden's possession did they look at to check whether it was correct or not?
Like I said, it would be drawings.
Nothing else?
Possibly the MBS spec as well, but I can't recall
Right.
if that was the case or not.
Is it fair to assume that at least from the 20th of May 2015, well, let me ask actually a prior question. We see this attached to Mr. Lawrence's email of May 2015. Was this format, quality control list, in operation at Ryden on this project before May 2015? Or was this the first time that it was being used on and from the 20th of May?
It doesn't look like a document that I've seen before.
Does that mean that you can't help me with my question?
Yes.
Right. Did you ever come across an occasion when you saw a quality control checklist, either in this form or any other form, that said that an incorrect project had been installed or had arrived?
I don't recall, to be honest.
Right. At what stage in the ordering and physical arrival and installation process did this checklist intercept incorrect products being used?
I would say at the time of the work being offered to us, because the subcontractors would order the materials and they would be delivered to site. They wouldn't, like I've already said earlier, they wouldn't have been particularly been checked by a Ryden manager. We was using trusted and, tried and tested contractors. There was a bit of trust there.
When you say the work being offered to us, what does that mean?
Offered to us for snagging.
Offered to you for snagging?
Well, not snagging, but like inspection at certain points.
I see. Let's just look at the rest of this, because there's a context on the document. The other things to be checked are setting out. Is that correct? What's setting out?
It means if the rails need to be 400 centres, then he would look at the drawing. It would tell him that the rails should be 400 centres. He'd put a tape on it. If it was 400 centres, then the setting out's correct.
Right. And then check fixings are installed according to manufacturer's guidelines and design.
So he would have the drawing in front of him, and it would say, maybe, I don't know, 4 screws per bracket.
And then you have...
count the screws per bracket.
Yes, I see. And then you've got fixing pull test, if appropriate, and then check correct product is installed. It looks as if, from this document and from what you're saying as well, that this quality control checklist would only be used after installation.
Yes.
Yes, I see. Were there any checks made in the process any earlier on, either at the ordering stage or the delivery stage, about whether the correct product is coming onto site and being installed?
I don't believe so.
Were you aware that Kingspan Cooltherm K15 insulation was used on Grenfell Tower, as well as Celotex RS5000 as an insulation product?
I wasn't then, no.
You weren't. Now, Were you aware that Kingspan, well, he wouldn't have been aware, I think, that Kingspan Cooltherm K15 was ordered in May 2015 and delivered in June 2015 to site?
I wouldn't have been aware of that, no.
Right. See, we can't find any record of that product being installed and as different from the specified insulation product. Can you explain to us why that is?
I don't know why. Are you asking why it was installed or why it was brought to site, or?
Well, I'm asking you why it was brought to site, first of all.
I don't know.
Right. No, we know it was installed, but we don't find a quality control checklist saying incorrect product is installed in relation to K15. Can you explain why that is?
I can't, no.
Now, I know you don't know when it arrived or even whether it arrived, but who at the time was responsible for overseeing the order and delivery of K15? So this is May, June 2015.
It would have been Subcontractor.
Do you know how and where it was installed on site prior to installation?
No.
Do you know anything about the process for calling that material off from where it was stored on site so that it could go onto the building?
When you say calling it off, what do you mean?
Taken off a pile and put on the building.
It wouldn't be a process, it would just be people picking it up and put it on the mast climber.
Right. And who oversaw that physical process?
That would have been Ben Bailey.
Ben Bailey. So Harley.
Yes.
And anybody at Ryden on site supervising that process at the time?
Yeah, I mean, there would have been a manager going around the building on a daily basis. So, yeah, I mean, I would expect it to be picked up if it was there.
I see. So somebody from Ryden would have seen K15 arriving and being installed?
Quite possibly, yes.
Well, I'm putting that to you. I'm asking you, is that correct?
Yes, I suppose they would have done, yes.
Was there anybody from Ryden ensuring that the manufacturer's installation guidelines, whether K15 or indeed any other product, were complied with?
That would have been part of the snagging process, I imagine.
But from Ryden's perspective, nobody before that stage?
Well, we can't inspect it if it's not been installed, because you just ask if the installation process.
Was anybody from Ryden present on site and supervising the subcontractor's installation and making sure that the installation was in accordance with the manufacturer's installation guidelines?
Probably not, but at snag stage they would have checked the fixings.
I see.
Because we can't look at things when they're half finished. They have to be, we have to look at them when they're complete.
Can you tell us what stage the installation of the insulation had got to in May or June 2015?
I couldn't.
Do you know whether there were any records kept of where the Kingspan Cooltherm K15 insulation was installed on the building?
I didn't know it was, so no.
No. And what I'm really trying to get to the bottom of is whether there was any Kingspan K15 around flat 16 on the eastern elevation of the tower.
I don't believe. I don't believe I was there when it got that low. It was quite high when I left.
When you left, where had it got down to?
I can't recall.
Okay.
I think it's in my statement, but I can't recall.
Now, you tell us in your statement that your role on site as project manager included managing the day-to-day running of the project, that's para 3, and monitoring the sequencing of the works as well as subcontractor efficiency. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. And you also say monitoring when materials were arriving on site. That's paragraph 15 of your statement.
Yes.
You stand by that, do you?
Yes.
Yes. How did you monitor the arrival of materials on site?
Because they were booked in with the marshal on the front, and the idea of them booking them in so we didn't have a road full of big lorries. It was more logistics than what was actually coming.
Right. And in your statement, to be fair to you, you do say that it's from a logistics and programming perspective.
Yes.
So your monitoring was limited to timing of arrival of lorries and where you were going to put them.
Yeah, I mean, it was a small dead-end road, so, we could only have one at a time. So
Right.
it's a matter of booking them in logically.
Right. How did you actually monitor the arrival of materials onto site?
It was done by the marshal at the front. So he would record, they'd be booked in, I think, maybe 48 hours in advance. And then there would be time slots.
I see. And the marshal, was he a Ryden or she a Ryden person or a Harley person?
They were agency.
Who were they?
What was the name?
Yes.
I can't remember.
All right. How did you monitor the programming and sequencing of materials arriving onto site?
But I personally wouldn't have oversaw that. That would be the managers that are looking after the areas. So during the meetings with the subcontractors, they'll be saying, deliveries need to be more timely, or you need to give us more notice of delivery,
Would you describe your role as including the responsibility to ensure that sufficient quantities of materials were on site in order for the works to stick to programme?
It wouldn't be my responsibility to make sure there's the quantities are on site. It'd be my responsibility to make sure the subcontractors are ordering in a timely fashion.
How would you go about discharging that responsibility?
Well, when the weekly, monthly meetings would happen with the subcontractors and the managers. They would ask about materials on site and when your next delivery is, and is that quick enough? Do you have enough men?
Would it be your job to know what products or materials were arriving at site and where they were going to go on the building?
No.
Whose job was that?
The various managers.
When you say various managers, who?
The external manager, or it depends on what was being delivered.
Yes, I see.
So if we're talking externally, then it would be one of the external managers. They would, make sure there was enough room for the materials to come in for one, because it was a very tight site.
So that's a Ryden person.
Yes.
For whom you were responsible.
Yes.
Yes. And when you were supervising their work, in that respect, what did you do?
What do you mean?
Well, your job was to supervise their work to make
Yep.
sure that the right products arrived and went on to the right point on the building.
I don't quite follow where you're going.
Well, you see, you've got external managers who you told us knew what products were arriving at site and where they were going. And my question is, what did you do to supervise them and monitor them?
It wasn't my job to supervise what materials come to site. That was what the managers were doing.
Yes.
And I think the drawings tell you where the material's going.
Yes. And my question was, you say it was for the managers to do, and my question is, what did you do to supervise and make sure that the managers were getting it right?
But I could tell by the quality checks. I could tell by the clerk of works inspections. If they weren't getting it right, then I'll be getting reports back from building control and clerk of works saying this isn't correct. Which
was it your job to stay in close communication with the relevant subcontractor about the supply of products coming onto site?
No.
Again, whose was that? Was that the external site manager?
Yeah, one of the managers, yes.
And who did you or they perhaps liaise with at Harley, specifically Harley, in respect of cladding materials arriving on site?
Yeah, it'd be probably Ben Bailey and Ray Bailey.
And who was it who liaised with them about that matter?
It would have been
at Ryden.
The external manager again.
Yes. Do you know who? Can you give me a name? Perhaps?
Probably Daniel Osgood, but it depends on the timings of when you're talking about.
Specifically, you're quite right. That was a general question. Let me ask it again in a specific time frame: May, June 2015.
It's been Daniel Osgood, I imagine.
Right. If there was a problem with the delivery or lead times were strained, and there was pressure, would you have been the contact point for the subcontractors?
That probably would have been Simon, because he had a better relationship with them, or a more detailed relationship with them.
Simon Lawrence.
Yeah, he'd worked with them on numerous projects I hadn't.
Right. So given your answers in relation to the site managers and what they would do, did the site managers have product-specific knowledge so that they could make sure that what was coming onto site?
They would be aware of what should be going on because they would have the drawings.
Right. Okay.
But I don't think they would have specific, like each delivery wouldn't say this lorry's carrying this. It would just be a time slot.
Right. But your evidence is that it would be the drawings that would give them the information against which they could cross-check the materials coming onto site.
Yeah.
But nothing other than the drawings.
Probably the spec as well, but
I see.
the drawing would quite generally be quite detailed.
Okay. Did Ben Bailey or anybody else at Harley, for that matter, tell you in May 2015 that there was a delay in the delivery of Silatex RS 5000?
I don't recall that now.
You didn't, right? You didn't get wind of that, right? Were you consulted at all about the delay in the supply chain in relation to insulation at that time?
I don't recall, but they would have gone straight to Simon Lawrence, not to me.
Right. Can you give us an idea of how behind the project was at this point?
In June, sorry.
Yes, in May or June 2015. Late May, early June.
Possibly 9 weeks.
Right.
I said it was conservative as well, but I'd say possibly 9 weeks.
Yes. Is it fair to say that at that point, late May, early June, time was pretty critical, days counted?
I think the whole time was critical, yeah.
Yes. Now, we've looked at a specific time slot for K15. Are you aware from your recollection whether there was any other occasion when Kingspan Cooltherm K15 was ordered as a substitute for Silatex RS 5000? Now, I take it from your answers that you've given me this morning already about Kingspan K15 that you didn't know anything about the specification and specifically its fire performance. Is that right?
That's right.
So you never got to see any of the spec for that material or any of the certificates?
I don't recall seeing any certificates for that material now.
Right. Did you ever see something called a Kingspan Declaration of Performance?
At the time, no.
No. Let me put this to you and ask you who would have done. It's SIG 703. SIG 703. This is the declaration of performance produced by Kingspan for Cooltherm K15. And here is, to put it generally, a lot of technical detail about this product. Did you ever see this document?
No. I don't recall seeing it, but I'm going to say no.
Would anybody, to the best of your recollection, at Ryden have seen this document, do you think?
Probably Simon. Lawrence.
Simon Lawrence, right. Okay. We've already been over the question of approvals for substituted products. Did you understand at the time that if a product was going to be changed, then Ryden had to get the permission from the TMA before substituting one product for another?
I don't just think it was a TMO, I think it'd be Studio E as well as lead architects.
Yes. Do you remember any occasion when, so far as you remember, Ryden did go to the TMO or Studio E and ask for permission before substituting K15 for RS 5000?
No.
If a decision had been made by, Well, let me ask it this way. Whose decision in the chain of command would it have been to make the substitution from RS5000 and instead have K15?
Well, I think the change needs to be put forward to the architect.
Yeah, but whose decision would it have been made initially then?
Probably Harley would have put it to someone like Simon Lawrence, who would have then put it to Harley.
I see. We say Harley would have put it to Simon Lawrence, who would have put it to Harley. So does it go round in a circle?
Harley would have put it to Simon Lawrence, sorry, and Simon Lawrence would have put it to Studio E.
Oh, to Studio E, right, okay.
Sorry.
So, to the best of your understanding, any change of material would have been signed off by Studio E. I think that's what you're telling us. So,
Yeah, I think Studio E and the TMO at the time.
do you remember any occasion in which you became involved in the question of substituting one product for another on this project?
Not particularly. I mean, there was not particularly, not that any stands out.
Right. Do you have any recollection about whether building control were told that Kingspan Cooltherm K15 had been proposed as an alternative insulation product to the RS5000?
I wouldn't be able to comment. I don't know.
Right. And I want to ask you some questions about infill panels. When I say infill panels, does that mean anything to you?
It's the panel that infills between the windows. Is that
Yes.
what you're referring to?
Yes, between the windows and above the cladding spandrel panels. That's what I'm going to be asking you about. All right, now, can I ask you to turn to HAR 403951, please? HAR 403951. This is an email dated the 6th of March 2015 from Neil Crawford to Paul Hanson, and it's copied to John Hoban. They're both RBKC Control.
Mm-hmm.
And it also goes to Simon Lawrence at Ryden and you, Simon O'Connor.
Mm-hmm.
See that?
Yep.
And if you look at the top of the page, you can see that Mr. Crawford has attached a number of drawings. And when you got this email, do you remember, or do you think that you would have opened the attachments?
Quite possibly. Is it possible to see one of the attachments? Or?
I'm going to show you one. Yes, if you go please to HAR 403953, one of these drawings was an elevation drawing. HAR 403953. Now, this is a Harley drawing authored by Kevin Lamb, as you can see from the box second from the right and the smaller box on the left, drawn by KVL. Do you see that? And there's a little lamb picture in the box, so we can see that it's Kevin Lamb, and it's marked approved for construction, but there's no Studio E stamp on it. And I want to zoom in with you to the left-hand side of the window arrangement, if we can, please, because you'll see there are two areas of the infill panel which are identified. The first one is a large hatched area. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And that's got, although it's not terribly clear on the screen, it's got a P1 in the corner.
Yeah, I can see
Can you
that.
see the P1?
Yeah, I can see
you
that.
can. Now, can you confirm that that is the panel that sits between the windows of the kitchen and the bedroom in this particular arrangement?
I don't know if that's the bedroom, but it's a panel that sits between them two windows, yes.
Yes, all right. And that's what we call the infill panel. Now, there's a second, smaller hatched area, which on the left-hand side, beyond the window and above the smaller window, which has P2 in the top left corner. Can you see that?
I can.
And is that the panel within the window itself, which has the kitchen extract fan?
Yes.
Do you remember reviewing this drawing, particularly when it came to you in the pack which we'd seen attached to the email?
No.
Do you remember whether you made any investigations into which materials made up P1 and P2, these infill panels in these two separate locations?
No.
Now, if we don't need to go back to the email, but Mr. Crawford also attached to the email we looked at a document called Specification Notes, and I'd like to look at that with you. That's HAR 403955. And again, just to help you with this, with the origins of this document, it's authored by Kevin Lamb. It's dated the 15th of January 2015, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of the document. And in fact, this one is a slightly later revision. If you look at the box on the left, it's revision A of the 3rd of March 2015. Can you see that?
I can.
So this is, I think, what comes to you as attached to that email. Do you remember looking at this document?
Not specifically, no.
Not specifically in the context of that email, or not at all?
It doesn't. I'm not looking at it thinking, "Oh, I remember this."
Right. So you don't remember this document at all from your involvement on the project?
No.
Right.
Not that I recall.
All right. Let's see how far we get then. If you look at the left-hand column about halfway down, can you see that it says P1 glazing, P1 panels? Can you see that?
I can.
And can you see that the outer is 1.5 aluminium skin, and then the core is 25 millimeters of styrofoam? Now, is styrofoam familiar to you as a product?
Yes, it is now.
It is now. Was it a familiar product to you then?
Not really, no.
Did you know that it was a trading name for extruded polystyrene, or XPS?
No.
No. Had you come across extruded polystyrene as an insulation material in your experience as at this time?
As at this time?
Yes.
No.
So as at March 2015? No. Immediately below what we've just been looking at, we can see glazing P2 panels, and then again outer 1.5 millimeters aluminium skin, and then core 25 millimeters Kingspan TP10 rigid insulation. Had you at that stage come across Kingspan TP10 rigid insulation?
Like I said earlier, I was aware of the trade name Kingspan, but I wouldn't have been able to give you a TP10 reference.
Did you know that that was an insulating product for use on the external surface of a building?
I knew it was used for insulating buildings, so I didn't know the ins and outs of it.
Okay. Can we then look at a different document, which is HAR 402477? This is an email from Ben Bailey to ACP at Panel Systems. Do you know who Panel Systems were?
ACP panel systems, no.
Right. Okay. Now, you don't get this email at the time, so I'm not going to ask you about the detail of it. I just want to ask you about the attachment to it. You can see that he attaches purchase order. It's PO 113 C1059. That's Grenfell Panel Systems, curtain wall panels, PDF, and we can find that purchase order at H50445. And the date of the purchase order is the 10th of September 2015. Now, I think by this time, is it right, you had already left the project?
Yes.
Did you know that Harley Curtain Wall had gone into administration by this stage?
I knew via another member of staff, yes.
Right. Now,
I actually didn't know they'd gone into administration. I knew they had problems.
Right. Okay. And now I know you'd left the site at this time, but do you know who had taken over responsibility at the site for monitoring the purchase order process?
That process would always be a surveyor.
Right. Now, I just want to see if you can help, and I know you'd left at this time, and it may be that you can't, but if we go to page 6 of this document, we can see a schedule of panels, P2, P3, P4, and P5, where we can see that they are all Kingspan, well, P2, P3, P4 are Kingspan, TP10 rigid insulation. In fact, our experts have found from their site inspections after the fire that the panels used at P2 did not have a Kingspan TP10 core, but a styrofoam core. Are you able to shed any light on why that might be?
No, like I say, I wasn't at the project then, and unfortunately, no, I can't help.
Did you leave the project before the P2 panels that had been delivered were checked to make sure that they were formed of the right product in accordance with specification?
I'm unsure whether I was gone by then or not, if I'm honest.
Right. Can I ask you to look at a document which tells us a little bit about Ryden's relationship with XOFA? So I'm going to turn to that topic, I think, quite briefly. And it's RYD 3017870. This is a set of minutes of the second progress meeting, progress meeting number 2, on the 19th of August 2014. And we can see that you were present and Simon Lawrence was not, but these minutes were for his information. Were you there in his place, do you think?
No.
You were there, though, weren't you?
I was there, yes.
Right. If we go through it, we can see various references to SL. If we just turn to page 2, please, I think we can see. We can see that from, actually, let's do 1.1. Well, let's go back a page. Sorry, 1.1 is the first one, I think, while we've got it there. This is under minutes of previous meeting. And you can see in the second line, SL confirmed that the decision will have no implication on programme and is required by early October. Should we read instead of SL, SOC?
No.
Because he wasn't there, so he couldn't have done anything or said anything.
He would have forwarded anything he needed to answer to probably Zach.
Right. Let's just turn the page then to paragraph 1.5, top of page 2. SL to appoint other consultants to include fire, DDA, acoustic, etc., after the main subcontractors are on board. Do you remember there being a discussion at this meeting about the appointment of other consultants to include fire?
I don't particularly remember that, no.
I mean, it says SL to appoint. Can you account for how that gets into the minute as SL, not SOC?
Because it wouldn't be it would be my role to appoint anybody. So it definitely isn't supposed to say SOC.
Right. When it goes in the next paragraph to say SL confirmed that his M&E subcontractors are on board and investigations underway, given that he wasn't there and you were, why does it say SL?
Because, like I said previously, he'd probably sent meeting notes forward.
I see that. Okay, right. So can you help at all with the first paragraph? Was there any discussion at this meeting, to the best of your recollection, about the appointment by Ryden of other consultants to include fire?
I don't particularly remember that conversation, but I know there was conversations about appointing people, not just fire people. I think it was various people.
DDA, can you help with that?
Disability, isn't it?
Disability Discrimination Act.
Yeah.
Do you remember specific discussions about whether you should appoint a consultant to assist Ryden with meeting obligations under that legislation?
I don't remember that at all, but I know the toilets in the boxing club, or maybe the nursery, were down to be DDA compliant.
Right.
But I would expect a qualified architect to be able to do that.
I see. You give a specific example. Can you think of any other examples where DDA expertise was considered?
Possibly the boxing club.
Right. Can I ask you to look at a document which did involve Exova? This is issue 3 of the Outline Fire Safety Strategy Report, which is at CST 6085. CST 6085. Now this, Mr. O'Connor, is issue 3 of Exova's Outline Fire Safety Strategy, dated the 7th of November 2013. Have you ever seen this document before?
Yes.
Were you aware of this report during your time as project manager on the Grenfell Tower project?
I was aware of it because I remember the picture.
You remember the picture. Did you see it at the time then?
It was definitely on site.
It was definitely on site. Did you ever read it?
Not that I recall.
Right. Do you remember the circumstances in which you saw it? You say you remember the picture. Can you, casting your mind back, tell us the sort of circumstances that you can recall whereby you might have had a chance to look at this document?
This would have been, as you went into the site office on the left, there was a load of boxes where documents were kept.
Yeah.
That would have been in one of them.
It would have been in one of them. Right. What would have given you the occasion to take the box down which had this document in it?
Oh, sorry, it wasn't boxes, it was a wooden structure. So you could see documents in it. It was almost like a multi-story, like post box, if you like.
I see. Do you remember any occasion when you pulled it out of its little structure and looked at it?
I don't recall, no.
Do you remember any occasion on site when other people that you could see or hear did that?
I don't recall seeing anybody reading it.
Right. Apart from an exchange of emails, which we're going to come to in the September of 2014 between Exova and Studio E, among other people, which we're going to come to shortly, can you remember Exova ever giving any fire safety advice in relation to the rain screen cladding facade at Grenfell Tower?
No, it's not a conversation I would have had. I don't think I ever spoke to anybody from Exova.
Casting your mind back to your own experience on the Chalcots cladding, I think you say you weren't involved, but do you remember whether Ryden engaged the services of a specialist safety engineer, fire safety engineer for that project?
I wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know?
Mine was all internal.
Right. I'm going to ask, and I'll come back to those emails, but I'm going to ask you for the moment about Carl Stokes. Does the name mean anything to you?
It does, yeah.
In paragraph 16 of your statement, you say that you saw emails. Well, perhaps we'll be able to just look at it. RYD 3094221. This is your statement. And at paragraph 16, you say, about 8 lines down from there, you say, I was also aware that consideration was being given to fire safety and compliance with the building regulations throughout my involvement in the project, because I saw emails involving Harley's, Studio E, RBKC Building Control, and CS Stokes and Associates Limited, CS Stokes, an independent fire risk assessor engaged by KCTMO, who was allowed uninhibited access to the construction site. And just moving on in your statement to page 10, please, if we can just skip 2 pages forward to paragraph 19. you also say there, I was aware, do you see that inspections were carried out by Ryden, Harley's, JS Wright, Studio E, clerks of the works, CS Stokes, curtains and building control, during my involvement in the refurbishment project. And then you say at page 11, paragraph 22, if we can just look at that, you say regular inspections were carried out by CS Stokes, who I believe would be provided with information by KCTMO confirming any areas they thought should be inspected. Now, I've shown you all of those parts of your witness statement. First of all, what did you think CS Stokes' role was?
To look at fire safety as a whole on behalf of the KCTMO.
Fire safety as a whole in relation to the building or in relation to the project or both?
In relation to the project, really. He would quite often just turn up on site and we would walk the construction site first, and then we would go up to various floors, and he would quite often pick up, just little items that he wasn't, I won't say not happy with, but he would report back to the TMO.
And did you go with him on these visits?
Not always. At first I did, because I believed it was good to get a relationship, but after that it would have been Jason or whoever was looking after the areas he was going to.
Did you ever read his reports?
Yeah.
You did. Did you rely on his reports in any way?
When you say rely, I mean if there was something in there we needed to correct, then we would correct them.
Yes, when I say rely, what I mean is, in making any decisions that you made yourself, did you use Mr. Stokes' reports as the basis for making those decisions?
I don't understand the question, sorry.
Right, well, did you do anything in reliance on anything he said in his reports?
Only if it concerned us. If not, the reports would generally come from the TMO. So he would be looking at various items that the TMO would due to be carrying out, and that would then overlap with our work slightly by saying, right, you need to do this, but that's not part of whatever you're doing. So,
right. Now, in his witness statement, Mr. Stokes says that he wasn't retained or appointed to undertake any supervisory role of the refurbishment. Does that accord with your recollection of his role?
I didn't really know what his full role was. I knew he was employed by the TMO, and I knew he would come to site to look at fire safety.
Did you ever speak to Mr. Stokes about the cladding to be used on the building?
No. Not that I recall.
Did Mr. Stokes ever give you or anybody else at Ryden any advice or any assurances in respect of the fire safety of the rain screen facade?
I don't think we discussed it.
Did you ever tell Mr. Stokes that the rain screen facade was fire rated?
That doesn't sound like words I would use, so no.
Did you ever tell Mr. Stokes words to the effect that the rain screen facade was safe from a fire safety perspective?
I don't believe so.
Can we look at ART 403597, please? These are minutes of a Housing Management Liaison Committee meeting on the 16th of February 2015. And we looked at these yesterday, I think, with Mr. Lawrence in a slightly different context. The meeting was attended by, as you can see, you, Christina Stefanou, and Linda Prentice from Ryden, and Janice Jones and Siobhan Rumble from the TMO, as well as Claire Williams, yes?
Yep.
If you go to page 3, please, I'd like to look at paragraph or item 14. Communal lobby duct panels.
Yep.
And it says there, some of the duct panels were broken and found to be various materials, for example, chipboard. Ryden's fire strategy consultant had been on site and met Carl Stokes, TMO's fire risk assessor, and agreed that these panels did not need to be fire resisting on the basis that the services were fire stopped at floor and ceiling slab level, and so there would be no fire spread within the ducts. Who did you understand to be Ryden's fire strategy consultant?
I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, we've seen that you were at this meeting. Did you see these minutes after the meeting?
More than likely, yes.
Would you have seen then, or would you have read them carefully?
I would have read them, yeah.
Would you not therefore have seen that there was a reference in them to Ryden's fire strategy consultant?
Yeah, I can't tell you who that would have been.
Did Ryden have a fire strategy consultant?
Not that I'm aware of.
Who could it have been then who met Carl Stokes and made the agreement referred to?
I don't know. I honestly don't. I don't know.
Were you present at any meeting between any person who could conceivably be described as occupying the position of a fire strategy consultant and Mr. Stokes?
I don't recall being in a meeting with anybody. The Ryden fire strategy consultant, I don't recall at all.
Do you remember any discussion between either you or anybody else at Ryden with Mr. Stokes about the subject of whether these panels did or did not need to be fire resisting?
I recall a conversation about what they were made of. I think they were adjacent to the lift shaft. I recall having the conversation about what they were made of, but there was no one else sort of involved, and I think that's what probably sparked this meeting, if it happened.
Do you recall a conversation with Mr. Stokes about what the panels were made of?
Yeah.
Was that a conversation on site?
Yeah, it would have been, yeah.
Were you qualified to make an agreement with him about whether they did or didn't need to be fire resisting?
No.
Who was it who attended on site and met Carl Stokes who would have been qualified or was qualified to agree with him that the panels didn't need to be fire resisting?
I think I've already answered that. I don't know.
Right. Who was responsible for drawing up these minutes? You can look at page 1 to see who was there. If we could please, just to remind you. You can see that it's you, Christina Stefanu, Linda Prentice, and others from the TMO. Do you know whether it was Ryden or the TMO who drew up these meetings?
I think it would have been the housing officers.
The housing officers. When you say the housing officers, you mean
Actually, on
Janice
this one, I've
Jameson?
just spotted that Claire Williams was there. Claire Williams would have done that.
I see. So, and we know this is an ART document, an Artelia document, but how many of these meetings did you go to, these housing management liaison meetings?
A fair few. They were more. They weren't about. This is quite a rare one actually, but they were more about residents and access, because there was a few access problems at the time.
And were meetings produced for all of these meetings? Were minutes produced for all of these meetings?
I would imagine so. I couldn't clarify if they definitely were, but I would imagine there was, yes.
Right. And do you remember who was responsible in general terms for drawing up the minutes and circulating them?
I would say Claire Williams.
Is that a guess or is that a recollection?
No, that's, if Claire was there, she would definitely be the one that would be producing these minutes.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chairman, that's a convenient moment. I'm about to turn to another topic.
Very good timing in that case, Mr. Millett.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Well, Mr. O'Connor, we'll have a break now so we can all get some lunch.
Thank you.
Please don't talk to anyone while you're out of the room about your evidence or anything to do with it. And we'll come back at 2 o'clock, please.
Perfect.
All right?
Thank you.
You'd like to go to the usher? Good. 2 o'clock, please. Thank you.